The morning the fence posts were gone, Daniel Mercer didn't panic. He stood at the edge of his pasture in Cedar Ridge Estates, a polished suburban development just outside a fast-growing southern city, and watched as fresh gravel cut through land that had belonged to his family for 4 generations. A bike path, curving gently, beautifully paved, running straight through active cattle land. The HOA newsletter had called it a community wellness enhancement initiative. They forgot one thing. The pasture was still operational, and the cows were not part of the plan. Daniel Mercer had learned the rhythm of the pasture before he learned multiplication. At 42, he still woke before sunrise, long before the sprinklers clicked on in Cedar Ridge Estates, the polished subdivision that now surrounded his family's land like a picture frame around an older painting. His farmhouse stood at the center of 200 acres his grandfather had once described as breathing land. It shifted with seasons. It fed cattle. It carried memory. When the developers first approached him 5 years earlier, they came with brochures and soft voices. Cedar Ridge Estates, they said. A luxury lifestyle community. They wanted everything. Clean slate, uniform streets, walking trails, greenbelt connectivity. Daniel declined. Not angrily, not dramatically, just firmly. So they built around him. Now manicured lawns pressed up against his fencing. White vinyl boundaries met weathered cedar posts. Mailboxes aligned perfectly along streets with names like Whispering Brook Lane. And in the center of it all, Daniel's active cattle pasture. At first, the tension was subtle. An HOA newsletter mentioned odor concerns. Then came formal complaints about agricultural aesthetics. Then letters about fence compliance, even though his fencing met agricultural code. Daniel responded to each one calmly, attaching zoning documents and livestock registration forms. He wasn't trying to antagonize anyone. He simply continued operating his ranch exactly as it had always been operated. But inside Cedar Ridge's clubhouse, during board meetings with catered coffee and PowerPoint slides, Daniel's name began appearing more frequently. Obstacle. Inconsistency. Non-aligned property usage. The HOA president, polished, articulate, used to corporate control, began discussing community enhancement projects. One of them was labeled Greenbelt Expansion Phase 2. It curved gently across a map projection of the subdivision. Through Daniel's pasture. Months later, on a quiet Tuesday morning, Daniel stepped outside and noticed something wrong. Fence posts were missing. Orange construction markers lined his grazing corridor. And fresh gravel was being unloaded. No one had called him. No one had knocked. But a path had already begun. And it ran straight through active cattle land. The contractors worked efficiently. To them, this was just another job: graded earth, leveled base, compacted gravel. They followed a map provided by the HOA's development committee. An old survey was attached to the packet, marked with a faded easement line that had never been updated after the final subdivision adjustments. On paper, the path looked legitimate. In reality, it crossed operational grazing zones. Daniel did not storm toward them. He walked the perimeter slowly, phone in hand. He photographed, removed fencing, equipment placement, survey stakes, contractor signage. Then he went inside and pulled out the leather folder that contained his property documentation, updated survey, agricultural exemption certificate, livestock registration, county zoning compliance. He called his attorney, not with anger, with precision. Meanwhile, Cedar Ridge Estates sent out a celebratory email blast. We're excited to introduce Phase 2 of our Community Wellness Initiative. Soon, residents will enjoy extended bike access connecting the north and south sides of the neighborhood. Some residents applauded. Others were confused. Isn't that farmland? It looks like it goes through the cows. But the board reassured everyone. All necessary permissions are in place. Within weeks, the gravel was compacted. A smooth ribbon curved across the pasture like it had always belonged there. The HOA installed small wooden posts with reflective markers. Children began riding bikes through it before the official opening. Joggers passed through early mornings. Daniel did not interfere. He rotated cattle exactly as scheduled, because the pasture was still operational, and cattle don't recognize newsletters. One afternoon, a jogger stopped abruptly. 3 cows stood calmly on the path, chewing hay, blinking into the sun. The photo hit the neighborhood Facebook group within minutes. Why are there cows blocking the new bike path? The comments section exploded. Daniel watched quietly and waited. The pasture followed a rotational grazing system designed decades earlier and refined over time. Water access points were fixed. Feed distribution zones were deliberate. Movement patterns were predictable. The bike path ran directly through one of those rotations. So when Daniel moved the herd as scheduled, they naturally crossed and occupied the gravel. The cattle did not panic. They did not react. They simply existed where they were legally meant to exist. Complaints increased. Manure on trail. Path obstructed. Children uncomfortable riding near livestock. The HOA board called an emergency session. The president insisted Daniel was intentionally disrupting community improvements. A motion was proposed to fine him for obstruction. That was when Daniel's attorneys sent a certified letter. The Mercer property remains active agricultural land under county designation. No easement exists granting construction rights. The recent installation appears to constitute unauthorized encroachment. The room changed. Suddenly, it wasn't about aesthetics. It was about liability. Insurance carriers were contacted. One asked a simple question. Was livestock land use assessed prior to construction? Silence. Within days, the county zoning office scheduled a site visit. Residents began asking harder questions. How much did this cost? Was this approved properly? The gravel path, once a symbol of community pride, now looked like an expensive assumption. The inspection was thorough. Survey markers were checked. Boundary lines were remeasured. Documentation was reviewed. The conclusion was calm but unmistakable. The path extended beyond any allowable right-of-way and crossed fully active agricultural land without recorded easement authorization. Fence removal had been conducted without property owner consent. The HOA board fractured almost immediately. The treasurer reviewed potential restoration costs. The secretary questioned the original survey source. The president insisted it was a technical misunderstanding. Meanwhile, Daniel continued his routine. Morning feed. Fence line checks. Water trough maintenance. At dusk, he walked the pasture slowly. He remembered his grandfather's voice describing soil like it was alive. This land remembers how it's treated. He wasn't fighting for profit. He was protecting continuity. The county issued a compliance directive. Remove unauthorized construction. Restore fencing. Return land to pre-construction condition. The HOA attempted negotiation. They invited Daniel to a private meeting. We believe a shared use agreement could benefit everyone, they said carefully. He listened respectfully. Then he replied, the pasture remains active.
No anger.
Just clarity. When residents received notice of potential special assessments to cover restoration, frustration spread quickly. A vote of confidence in the board was scheduled. The community meeting filled the clubhouse. Residents who once celebrated the bike path now studied financial spreadsheets projected onto a screen. Legal fees. Restoration expenses. Insurance complications. A motion was raised to remove the current president.
It passed.
A new interim board took over within weeks. One of their first actions was compliance. The gravel was removed. The soil beneath was carefully regraded. Native grass seed was replanted. Daniel supervised quietly, ensuring the irrigation channels were restored properly. A new fence line went up, reinforced, clearly marked, respectful of boundaries. Months later, the land looked as though the path had never existed. The cattle moved naturally again. The subdivision adjusted. Under new leadership, the HOA approached Daniel with a different proposal. Not through the pasture, but along the outer boundary, fully outside grazing zones. A modest perimeter walking trail with educational signage about agricultural land use. Optional. Collaborative. Daniel considered it carefully. This time, The conversation included surveys, county officials, and written agreements.
No assumptions.
Just communication. On a warm evening nearly a year after the first gravel truck arrived, Daniel stood at the fence line watching the herd settle into the grass. The subdivision lights glowed softly in the distance. The pasture breathed. It had endured development, newsletters, debates, and diagrams. And it remained what it had always been: active land. The path had disappeared, but the lesson stayed. Ownership isn't defined by planning committees. And land does not change simply because someone draws a line through it.